Hello everyone. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Stephanie and today we are back with another mukbang. Woo! I am really excited because we're making this crazy queso dip that I saw on TikTok, and for some reason she disabled her comments. So I'm like, is this woman canceled? Is something happening with this video? Does this recipe suck and we just don't know about it? I don't know, but I'm gonna try it because it was too late. I already bought all the ingredients and everything. So we're making like a crazy chorizo queso dip. This is not authentic. This is definitely a fusion. And to go with it, we made fusion tacos. We made these tacos, and some of them we ordered from the restaurant, and we have like chips, this elote dip, we've got this hash brown, no, we've got the tater tots with an egg on top. Oof. And I think going from eating meals like this for mukbangs, which I just want to describe to you, we have 2 bags of cheese and an entire bowl of cubed cheese. I think going from this type of food and then going back to eating healthy meals, because like, come on, it's hard. You know, it's hard because it's not gonna taste as good as a giant vat of queso. But HelloFresh makes it so much easier. I love that with HelloFresh, I can choose recipes every single week, and they come packed with just fresh produce that comes directly from the farm to my front door in under a week. I love the fact that I'm always getting the freshest flavors of the seasons. Every season that changes, I mean, it's like a new exploration of recipes. I was gonna have my fiance make this Italian chicken over lemony spaghetti. Does that not sound amazing to you? I was gonna get tacos anyway for the queso dip. So these are the tacos that I made. Well, my fiance made them. Okay.
Excuse you.
He loves making the HelloFresh recipes because the recipe cards that come with your meal kit, they're so easy to follow. Honestly, he said it's like bringing back the fun in cooking because you don't have to spend all of your time grocery shopping, coming back, portioning out your ingredients, driving home, unpacking your groceries. You can just cook the ingredients that are shipped straight to your door. If you're craving something different, you can choose from their amazing spring recipes like their sweet heat shrimp tempura, garden spinach ravioli, their one pot creamy lemon dill chicken soup. Are you kidding me? HelloFresh has so many recipe options to choose from. Like they've got veggie, pescatarian, fit and wholesome. Fit and wholesome meals are awesome because you can eat well without sacrificing flavor. So you maintain your goals and you feel good about your food choices. They even have Mediterranean recipes that are filled with like fresh fruit, veggies, nuts, olive oils. And you can even customize your favorite dishes with their new custom offerings, which means you can swap out a protein for another. So if you don't eat pork, you can swap it to something else. You can even add a protein to a veggie dish. So that means more meals tailored to you and your family. We also waste a lot less food since all the ingredients come pre-portioned and you get exactly what you need. And it's the first carbon neutral meal kit company. And nearly all of their packaging is recyclable, so make sure to go to HelloFresh.com and use code BISS16, BISS16 to get up to 16 free meals and 3 surprise gifts. That's HelloFresh.com and use code BISS16 for up to 16 free meals and 3 surprise gifts. And thank you HelloFresh for sponsoring today's video, and let's get into it. I mean, I should start putting the cheeses in to let it melt, but I need this to heat up. In the meantime, let's eat a taco. I'm gonna eat the HelloFresh one. These babies are the best. Here, let me give you one. He's so proud of these.
Look, I don't know if the ones you bought, store-bought, is gonna compete with this. Because I've never added orange into a dish. And I don't know, I'm just speechless.
Oh my god. I'm gonna be honest with you. This is my 3rd taco in the past like 10 minutes. I ate 2 of these upstairs because I was like, I can't. And I'm gonna try to keep it really honest. This one's leaking all the juices because that's how juicy these tacos are. I guess I'll try. Which one do you want?
I think you should do something like kind of similar.
Okay, what like similar? Maybe the shrimp? No, that's not the similar.
Like
what the heck?
Like the beef one.
This one?
Is that a beef?
Yeah.
Or something pork or whatever? Try that.
All right.
And you can be honest. Be honest.
Okay.
Let me try this too.
So
I'll be the judge too.
it's good.
It seems meaty.
It's a little dry. Maybe it's also because it's a corn tortilla versus a flour tortilla. A little dry.
Very dry.
I'll be honest. Very freaking dry. Never eat this again. Would not recommend.
Some sour cream? Or maybe the queso that you're making.
Oh yeah, when you dip
with
it.
some dip some? Then that'll be good.
Okay, so you gotta add in a bunch of cubed cheeses. She used Velveeta. I'm gonna use cheddar cheese because I'm not really the biggest Velveeta fan. I mean, if you can make me a dish with some amazing Velveeta, then maybe I'll change my mind. Maybe I just suck at using Velveeta. Because I've had Velveeta dishes that were actually pretty good. Then we're adding in Monterey Jack. I want to call him Monterey. I want to call him Montero. Guess what we're talking about today? The highly requested topic of the Titanic. I was nervous to even tackle this behemoth of a subject because there's just so much going on. Okay, this is heavy cream. I don't know how much I should add. What do you think? Because you're a chef now.
I'm gonna add all of it. Yeah.
Really?
I like it somewhat runny.
You like it runny? That's gonna be what's gonna happen to us very, very soon. We're gonna be runny in the bathroom, okay? Why do we keep doing these videos? It's just delicious. Now we're gonna add in some chipotle peppers. These are chopped.
What the?
Does that not look good?
That's crazy.
Then a splash of black pepper. I don't wanna do too much. I'm not the biggest black pepper fan, and I'm just gonna leave it as it is. And I'm gonna take another bite of a taco. Good. I'm gonna try this fish and chips taco, because there's some fries in here, and then we're getting into the Titanic story. Do you guys know the Titanic? There's gonna be that one young person out there that's like, oh, isn't that like a really good movie? I'm gonna die.
Is it not just a movie? So how much of the movie is actual truth?
I don't know, because...
What do you mean? I thought you were talking about it.
I don't remember all the facts of the movie. So I can't really, because I didn't watch the movie as like, ooh, this is definitely research. It's bubbling. Why is it bubbling?
Duh.
Okay, I'm going to put it on low.
No, it's gonna kind of heat up a little.
Okay, I trust you. Since you're a chef now, he makes one dish of tacos and suddenly he's Gordon Ramsay. He's dishing out that cooking advice. Okay, I don't like this fish and chips taco. I'm sorry.
What is this? Is this fried chicken? What is this, man?
Fried tofu.
Why?
The shrimp one is good. Okay, anyway, let me get into the story. Here's my opinion about the Titanic, the movie. Jack could have easily been on the board. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me, but I get it. Like, it makes for a more riveting story. But it is a not so good event in history. Like, good movie, not good event in history. Let's talk about Titanic in terms of history because it's freaking wild. So first of all, this whole disaster, the whole thing happened because of capitalism. Let me explain. This was the beginning of the 20th century, and suddenly citizens were waking up all across the world with this burning passion. They're like, we gotta travel between Europe and North America via the Atlantic Ocean. And since there was this new demand of people wanting to make that cross-Atlantic trip, all these ship manufacturers are getting riled up. It became almost this pissing contest of who's gonna build the largest, most modern, luxury traveling
What happened?
Something just crack? But is it done? Should I try it with a chip? I love cheese. It didn't love me back. I do everything I can to make it love me back. I put so much money into the cheese market, and I get no returns. Anyway, speaking of returns, all of these shipping manufacturers are like, we're gonna build the most modern, the fanciest, the fucking biggest, largest ship out there. We're gonna carry passengers. This is like the start of the cruise ship. Like, that's genuinely what it was. So a British shipping company called the White Star Line, and its CEO at the time named Bruce, they decided they were gonna win this little ship race, which isn't that wild because imagine we have a space race one day, but make it commercial, like not the space race between the countries, and all the billionaires are just fighting to create these little space travel containers.
That's exactly what's going on.
Oh, okay. Little Tupperwares for us to get into, and they just fucking burst through the fucking stratosphere. Yeah.
There's a lot of companies nowadays already.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
A lot.
Like a space hotel? That'd be fancy. And all the YouTubers are gonna go on it and be like, 24 hours in a space hotel. Am I ashamed that I'm gonna be one of those people? Yes.
No, you're not gonna go.
I'm going to space.
No, you're not.
If it's affordable and if it's safe.
We were literally talking about this last night. Like, we're just like, imagine the anxiety you feel before the roller coaster take off. Just sitting there waiting for it to take off.
Yes.
You're so anxious. Now imagine you're going to space in a rocket ship. Like, you will shit your pants. Okay?
So
What's
this
that?
is the chorizo.
Ooh. Yeah, spread it over on top. Yeah. Wow, that's beautiful. Honestly beautiful.
You like it?
Oh yeah, so good.
Are you ready for the onion breath? You can never separate me and onions. We're
Do I
best
squeeze
friends.
it in there?
Yeah, like drizzle it, like a dollop. Like
a dollar?
A dollar.
Like this?
Can you make it more aesthetic and not like doo-doo, babe? Now it's time to dip. Now it's time. I don't even know what to dip. I'm gonna dip, I guess, one of these tacos. I'm gonna dip my freaking HelloFresh taco, honestly. And I'm not even saying this because I'm sponsored right now, because it sounds like I am. This is the best taco so far. So dip it.
Oh
Get it a little stringy. Wow.
Holy moly. Wow. It's actually so good.
Okay, let me try some sour cream. Ooh. Wow. What is that? It's so good. I feel like I gotta throw in some more peppers. Wow, I'm making a mess, but it's gonna be a delicious mess. I almost burnt myself. How is it? Okay, so I'm rolling up the taco. I'm dipping it in just straight up cheese, sour cream. I mean, it doesn't get wilder than this.
Wow. It's gnarly.
Last bite, then we get into it. Wow. Oh my gosh, this one's just sinking. It's sinking. Okay. I think the only downfall is we need more cheese.
Honey?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's perfect.
You don't think it needs to be stringier?
I think this is good.
So this massive British ship company, and like when I say massive, this is probably the top of the game. The CEO, Bruce, decides that they're gonna team up with the Belfast shipyard, and they're gonna get to work constructing their dream. They wanted their ocean liners to be the biggest passenger ships that you have ever seen at the time. And I'm talking unreasonably big. So I'm not talking if someone's making a sedan, you're gonna make an SUV. Like, you're gonna go in there and make a freaking bus, like one of those Amtrak trains. That's what their goal was. It was gonna be so big that the shipyard, that is the literal place to build that ship, had to be modified so that they could even make this ship happen. They were gonna make 3 Olympic-class ocean liners. So the very first one was, the Titanic has 2 sisters, by the way.
Ocean liner is a ship.
Yeah, ocean liner is like what you would call like a fleet, you know what I mean? It's like a type of ship, it's like a massive, goes through the ocean. The Titanic had 2 sister ships, and all 3 of them would have really bad luck. Some say it's almost like a superstition. Something was cursed there. So the first one of them all was the Olympic. Her full name was number 400 RMS Olympic. This was gonna be the first of 3. It's to set sail in 1911 for its maiden voyage. And during the maiden voyage, it's gonna, the sister ship, Titanic, is gonna get to work. So does that make sense? It's not all at the same time. It's like the Olympic goes first, then the Titanic hits the water, then the Britannic is gonna hit the water. Now, both the Olympic and the Titanic would be almost identical in design. They're really similar, inside and out. And both of them would suffer these tragedies that it feels really doomed. Like the whole thing feels really eerie. Like if you're watching the building of the Titanic, first of all, it's just a huge, big boy ship. You might look at it and think, okay, wow, that's a beautiful ship. Like, look at all the amenities. And that's really what they cared about. The ship was less about safety and more about grandeur, opulence, surplus. Like, we want everyone to come in here and be like, wow, it doesn't even feel like a ship. Feels like we're on land. Remind you of anything? Modern day cruise ships. So this Titanic was 882 feet long and 9 inches. You can't forget the 9 inches, okay? Because every big boy knows that every inch matters. Every inch counts. So you're like, okay, what does that even mean? Like, I don't know how to compute that in my brain. That is the length of 6 commercial airplanes. 6 commercial airplanes, or close to 3 statues of liberties, just laying down. 3 of them, like this. Yeah, in a row, lined up. Or imagine 59 cars just lined up in a row. That's how long the Titanic was. If you laid down the Empire State Building, the ship would be 70% of the building. in length. The ship was also going to be 10 stories tall. I mean, it was a behemoth of a ship, but it's nothing compared to the size of a modern day cruise liner. So think about that next time your uncle is like, hey, y'all want to take a family cruise? No, Emo Boo, I don't like open water and I don't like being stuck with my family in a freaking ship. Like that doesn't even, how's that even fun? Why do people go on cruises? The Titanic required a whopping 600 tons of coal every single day to set sail. That's over 1 million pounds of coal every single day. You're like, wow, who's shoveling the coal? Do they have like this really cool machine to burn the fuel for the boat? No. 176 workers would be in the basement of that ship with like no windows, nothing, no happiness, just coal fumes.
So it's human powered?
Human powered.
Wow. 176 human horsepower.
I mean, they're just shoveling an ungodly amount of coal 24/7. Even the construction of the Titanic took the lives of 8 separate people. Now, because this is the beginning of the 20th century, people are like, what's workers' rights and safety regulations? That's dumb. Why do we need that? So 246 people were injured. 28 of those injuries were severe. Like, I'm talking amputations were necessary. Some people's arms were cut off by machinery. Their legs were crushed under falling pieces of steel just coming at them 10 stories from the top of the Titanic. But all of this is minuscule. All of this means nothing compared to the amount of money that the manufacturers would make off this luxury ship. I was gonna say shrimp.
Honey?
I think the Titanic and this era of ship making really solidified the foundation of cruise companies. Like, they're all about the profits. They're all not really about the safety. They're really about just surplus, opulence, Las Vegas on a boat. Now, back then, this was wild because ships were not a pleasant place to be. Think of all those stories that everybody is stuck in a wooden boat, in a wooden room, nauseous, not enough food to go around, every man for themselves. That's kind of the era that we're talking about. Now, the Titanic, it was going to be more like a hotel rather than a ship on the inside. It would feel grand, luxurious. They had a grand staircase that was made of polished English oak that stretched over 7 decks of the ship.
So that's like the famous staircase, right?
Oh yeah. But mainly, who would see that staircase? First class passengers. So the Titanic is like an airline in today's world, okay? There's different classes to this shit. They had the first class, the highest level. It would accommodate about 833 first class passengers. Jeez. And 614 passengers in second class, which is like business class, right? And then over 1,000 in economy, third class. But the key difference is economy is pretty nice in the airline industry. Like, most people fly economy. But on the Titanic, not that nice. Like, you just kind of get treated like shit. Meanwhile, the first class passengers, they get access to a swimming pool on a boat. That always trips me out. A gym, a Turkish bath, restaurants, cafes. The third class, they got their small little dining rooms and their own small, very, very small little quarters and some social gathering areas, as well as to access of some of the decks, including one called the poop deck. So it was really fancy. It was
What's
really...
a poop deck?
I think that's where they throw the poop on. No, I'm just kidding. They just called it the poop deck. I think there was a lot of toilets on that deck. I don't think they're hurling poop off the deck. Can you just imagine?
Okay.
So I guess some credit to the Titanic is that this was better than most third class offerings at other ships at the time. Like, other ships would just have one open room for everyone to just free for all. Like, no toilet facilities. It was even bad. So even though 8 people died in the making of the Titanic, it was somehow dubbed the Unsinkable. Like, think about that. Even before you go on its first voyage, it's called the Unsinkable. I feel like that's setting something up for failure. It just doesn't make sense. So the reason that they called it that was because the ship had 16 compartments, and divided these 16 compartments were these 15 watertight doors that could seal off with the press of like a couple little knobs, and it would seal the entire compartment off. So if water started bursting through compartment 1, they can watertight it off. So this could flood all the way and the rest of the ship would be fine. It would take a total of 4 of the compartments to be filled with water in order to sink the ship. So they had 4 shots every trip. I mean, that seemed nearly impossible to everyone at the time. Like, they're thinking, what? Like, if there's water in a compartment, I'll just seal it off. It's like, how on earth would 4 compartments breach at the same time in one voyage, right? Unfortunately, the manufacturers got a little bit cocky, a little bit too confident. They're like, yeah, watertight doors, good idea, good idea. So everything else we can skimp on because... For example, the iron pinheads that go into the ship's construction. So if you guys don't know what pinheads are, they're like nails that are used to hold metal plates together, which I imagine to be very important pieces of metal. The standard at the time was to use grade 4 pinheads. The higher the grade, the better. But the Titanic used grade 3 iron, which is considered less pure. It means that there's other materials and other metals inside the iron that weakens the iron. But they use that. I mean, I guess iron 3 was still sufficient for sailing, but if you're gonna be manning one of the biggest boats, why not just use grade 4 iron? Anyway, the ship is big. They would need a big crew. They had 3 different departments. They had the deck department, just crew workers that work the deck. Then you had the engineering department. They're just, getting the machinery ready. Then you had another 3rd department, basically a hotel department. So staff would just work to provide services for the passengers. Now, there is a woman named Violet Jessup, and she has a book about her story because... Her story is insane. She was actually aboard all 3 ships when the disaster struck all 3 of them. So she was on the Olympic, the Titanic, and the other sister ship, Britannic. She was on all 3 when they sunk.
What? But she kept going?
But she survived.
Okay.
And I'm not smiling because I think it's like cool or funny, but just like I'm in so much shock. And you're gonna get this same feeling of like, I don't even know what to say.
She went to which one? Like Titanic was the last one or?
No, Titanic was the second one. She was on the Olympic.
And she went to another one.
That one had some problems. And then she went to the Titanic. That one sunk. She survived. Then she went to the Britannic, this last sister ship, and that one sunk. The Olympic actually didn't sink, but we'll get to it. So she worked on these ships as the hotel staff mainly. So she would make the beds, clean the cabins.
She's the employee.
Yes. She's not just vacating.
Yeah, I'm like, I thought she was vacationing and she keep going back.
She like never learns her lesson.
No.
It's just that one person who won't stop going on fucking cruises.
Yeah.
You're like, what's wrong with you? No, she would work there. She would clean the bathroom. She would bring in breakfast trays and other room service stuff. She basically ran errands for the first class guests. So let me explain her very first stunt on the Olympic. The Olympic was sailing parallel to another ship owned by the same company called the Hawk. And the Olympic, so they're swimming like this. The Olympic's trying to make a really wide turn. And I guess the Hawk didn't react sufficiently because of all of that water pressure. There was like a lot going on in the ocean. Whatever. It resulted in the 2 ships just ramming into each other. Thankfully, the Olympic was able to sail away. I mean, sure, it had 2 very large holes on each side. But the other boat, the Hawk, it was much smaller. It almost capsized. Luckily, there were no casualties on that entire thing, but it was just this vibe, okay? People were getting a vibe out of it. And it sounds like Violet has the worst luck in the world, but it does seem like just being on a ship at that time in the early 1900s, like shit was gonna go down. Like it was just gonna happen.
Just that risky.
Yeah. So the Olympic has got some holes, and they start going back to the Titanic. Because remember, the Titanic is in production. It's being manufactured, and the Olympic is like, hey, we have these holes, and we're going to take some of the Titanic's building parts and just throw them on the Olympic. This is so pertinent to the story, because the Titanic was going to set sail. The first maiden voyage was going to be in March. This is important. But because the Olympic started taking a bunch of shit from the Titanic, it pushed that trip to April. Why does this matter, you ask? Because you're more likely to run into an iceberg in April than you are in March. So in order to combat all of this, they decided that the Titanic was just going to take a much more southern route, a much more warmer climate route, away from the known ice regions. But here's the problem. As it starts getting a little bit warmer, what happens?
Things are melting?
Ice melts, and icebergs are likely to break off their bigger counterparts and just kind of drift. And because it's such a big mass of ice, it's not going to melt. It's just going to drift to the southern side. Hello. And it was just headed straight for the Titanic. So regardless, all aboard the Titanic, the ship's captain was going to be Edward John Smith. This would actually be his final, it's like three fucking names, okay? Edward John Smith. That's like, what a name. This would be his final cruise before he retired forever. He previously led the Olympic. He was the captain with the little incident with the Hawk. He was captaining, commandeering the Olympic, so I don't know. Anyway, the CEO of the White Star, Bruce, he was going to be on board, as well as the ship's designer, Thomas Andrews. And in total, there would be 1,317 passengers on board for the maiden voyage. This was not a good outcome. The Titanic's maximum capacity for passengers, not including crew, was 2,453. So this is like half of it. It's like if an airplane is up in the air with half its seats full.
Why?
Well, there was a coal strike raging in the UK. I know.
Coal strike?
Can you imagine? Workers actually asking to get paid a livable wage. They were so ungrateful. We don't know why they wouldn't just get their ass up and work. So there was this huge strike, and the Titanic couldn't find enough coal. So the Titanic they couldn't go overseas if they were full to full capacity, because all of that extra weight would need more coal to burn. And the only reason that they could even do this trip was because they were borrowing coal from other boats, and their sister boat, the Olympic, had just brought a shit ton of coal from New York. They're like smuggling coal into the UK. So they set sail, and this includes the ship's crew, so they would have like 2,200 people on board, and in the excitement and greed of it all, the Titanic decided to cut some more corners. For example, they had capacity for a ton of lifeboats, 64 lifeboats to be exact. That's enough for 4,000 people, which is how much the ship can commandeer, right? But they decide, do we really need 32 lifeboats? Lifeboats are heavy. They're not like the inflatable. Like, can you imagine your ship is sinking and they're like, all right, everybody blow on a corner. Like, they're like heavy duty lifeboats. So that means more coal. Why do we do that? I mean, we're not even, and it's an unsinkable boat. So let's just put in 16 lifeboats and 4 collapsible ones. That will be enough for 1,178 people, and there are 2,200 people on board. So like 1,000 people are gonna not have lifeboats if something happens. But yeah, but they could do this because it was up to standard. Boat regulation was just fucking ass back then. I mean, it still is, but it was a ship show back then. Can you see the impending doom? Thank you for your half-ass laugh, okay? Thank you. And the reason is, the regulation stated that the lifeboats aren't to keep people alive. That's not the purpose of a lifeboat. The purpose of a lifeboat is to merely transport people from a sinking boat to the next closest boat. So the idea is the lifeboat would transport a full group of people to a neighboring boat, and then go back to the sinking boat, pick up the second crew of people. It's like an Uber, right? Back and forth. But that's dumb. Just dumb. I mean, you're assuming that there's gonna be a boat in close enough proximity to you and big enough to hold like an extra 2,000 people. It seems incredibly risky. But remember, this boat, the Titanic, is totally unsinkable. So it's just for show anyway. Now, I forget where I read this, but I think it was a cave diver. Was it on Reddit? I'm pretty sure it was on Reddit. So apparently there's this rule amongst people that have pretty risky hobbies. They say 3 mistakes and you're out. So let's say you're going cave diving today. You're on your way out, you stub your toe. Mistake number 1. You accidentally forget your favorite jacket that you wanted to bring. Accident number 2. Mistake number 3, you're driving, you spill a tiny drop of coffee and you're like, fuck. It's just too many bad luck. You gotta not go today. They have a 3 mistake rule.
That's cool.
It's fascinating, right? Because you know how some days just feel like those bad days and it could be in your head.
Yeah.
But this is, the Titanic is breaking like 29,000 rules. And they're still like, yeah, let's take thousands of people into the open waters. Anyway, that's how the Titanic sets sail. And within just minutes, they run into problems. Everyone was so occupied with making a ship with such a big fat dick that not a single person seemed to take physics into account. The Titanic was so big that whenever it moved, if there was any smaller ships within a close enough proximity, like let's say at a dock, it would create this huge bulge of water that would cause so much water movement that these small boats would actually swing off course, and due to the Titanic alone, the strength of the Titanic, it would ram into the Titanic. It would almost suction them in and ram them into the Titanic within minutes. So within minutes...
So a bunch of ships just like tapping on the side.
Yeah, but I mean, they avoided its first collision by just like 4 feet. I don't know how they did it, but they were like, everybody stop. Not a great start, but they keep going. 4 days into the trip, there was a scheduled lifeboat drill at 11 a.m. to prepare the crew in case of an emergency. But for some unknown reason, the captain cancels it.
Are they on the water now?
Yeah, they're deep in the ocean.
4 days.
Yeah. they didn't do the lifeboat drill. Soon after, the ship receives ice warnings, basically alerts that were like, hey, we're another ship on the water and we just want you to know that there's kind of like an iceberg ahead. You should probably U-turn or something. Maybe you should stop for the night. But the captain was like, full steam, let's keep it going. According to some sources, Bruce, the CEO, convinced the captain to do this so that they could stay on schedule. There was also this really weird, absurd idea that even an iceberg couldn't possibly hurt a ship as large as the Titanic. Excuse me, what? So they felt like the Titanic was so big, it was invincible. Like, what are you saying? Even the captain said, I cannot imagine any condition which would cause this ship to sink. Modern shipbuilding has gone beyond that. Anyway, the Titanic gets another ice warning. Nearby ships were saying, hey, over, there's like 3 icebergs just straight on your path, like straight up head-on collisions directly there just waiting for you to hit them. You're gonna bump them. We suggest you probably do something about it. But they were like, actually, we like a little chill. Like, we are not afraid of a little bit of ice. Let's keep going. It's also said that a man named Phillips, okay, so Phillips is working the little radio station, and the man was overworked, I'm not gonna lie to you. He got the second ice warning, and he allegedly had already gone 2 days without sleep. He was on a tight 2-hour schedule, so they were passing by this this specific place where they could still get access to a lot of radio frequencies. So this is when a bunch of notes come flooding in, because it's not just notes and messages that the crew needs to know, the passengers get messages. So it's like, if you were on a cruise, it's like me calling and being like, hey babe, how are you? And guess who has to listen to it and write that down?
Oh, he's like
yeah.
He's like, he has to go through all of it?
He has to go through all of it.
Oh my God.
And he was on like 2 hours of sleep. He was not doing well. He was sleep deprived, hadn't slept in 2 days.
So he was the I message.
Mm-hmm. You're so lame.
He was the WeChat. Dang, that's a tough job.
So he's just working his ass off. Like, I have a certain amount of sympathy for this guy, but like, shit really hits the fan. Why is it so good? So the guy is sleep deprived, dealing with a ton of messages, and a ship named the Californian. This was the one that was the closest to the Titanic, okay? They were gonna send a message, and it was an ice message. They followed up with another urgent message to say, hey, we're stopping for the night due to the ice, and if I were you guys, if I were the Titanic, I might consider doing the same thing. But the operator of the Californian, they didn't wait for Philip to be done sending his message. I know, you're like, 2022, what does that mean? So if I send you a message, when I know that you're sending somebody a message, it's gonna cause this collision of radio signals. And in Philip's ear, what he would get was this giant blasting frequency before he got the message from the Californian. And he's sleep deprived, he's pissed, he just like blew out his eardrums, and he probably didn't know the severity of the situation. He probably didn't understand that there was ice right there. So he yelled at the Californian. He said, shut up, you bloody idiot, I'm working Cape Race. I don't know what that means, but I do know it wasn't nice. It wasn't a nice thing to say.
Working Cape Race?
Yeah, but he was like, shut up, you bloody idiot. So the person working the Californian operator was like, okay, you want it like that?
Oh.
I'm gonna just turn off my radio equipment for the night.
Like, they're not gonna warn them.
They already warned them. So they're like, we did our job.
Oh, so later they can't get in contact.
So they turned off the radio equipment for the night because the Californian was also a cargo ship. It wasn't a passenger ship, so they could do that.
Oh,
like, it wasn't,
gosh.
as risky to do it because they didn't have messages coming in for passengers and stuff. It was a really petty response. It was a rather rude message, but I don't know, just weird. So another ship that was nearby, which was much further than the Californian, they did send a message to alert, hey, there's ice in your path, there's ice, we're stopping for the night. But they didn't categorize their message as urgent. So it was sent with a flood of generic messages. So all of these fellow passengers' moms and dads being like, hey babe, how's the cruise? It was in those pile of messages. I mean, remember, Phillips has a ton of messages. He might not have even heard it. I mean, I think it's more likely that he did not hear it.
Yeah, but don't you think, like, that's kind of not their responsibility to warn you, is it?
I think it's like
It's nice to be warmed. Isn't the Titanic should be able to detect?
Yeah. So what he's saying is like it's not Philip's fault.
Yeah, it's like
solely.
It's like there must be 100 other things go wrong on your own ship.
Oh yeah.
For the ship to sink versus like it's like I'm driving. If there's a traffic in front of me, like you know, it's like I have to see it myself, right? Yeah, sure. There's 3 people in front of me told me, hey, there's traffic, but the fact that I have to take responsibility, right? I have to be able to know. Yeah,
so I think like obviously we're not blaming the other ships, but it was just like a series of really unfortunate So I mean, no one's blaming the Californian for turning off their signal. I mean, rather petty, but you get it. So fast forward to 11:40 p.m. The Titanic's lookout with their own 2 ice spots, you guessed it, in front of them, a freaking iceberg. And he alerts the crew, but it was too late. The iceberg.
How come they detected so late?
Let me explain. The iceberg was directly ahead. It weighed over 10 times the weight of the Titanic. It was an even bigger boy. So this iceberg had broken free from the Greenland coast 2 years earlier, around the same time that the Titanic was starting to be built, ironically enough. And it had been steadily traveling south to the Titanic's path. And you're like, okay, why didn't they see it earlier, right? That's your question. Well, one reason could be that it was really hard to see that night. The iceberg, it was a really situation where there was no moon and the water was calm. So the sea was calm, meaning you couldn't see the water break around the icebergs. And icebergs are like clear, right? Yeah. And additionally, this is the worst part.
There's no radar back then?
No, but they have binoculars, right? But the crew... And I'm not laughing because I think it's funny. You guys know why I'm laughing. Don't be mean, okay? But the binoculars, they were all in a room, like a binocular storage closet. And someone lost the key. And instead of bursting through that binocular closet, they were like, I'm sure it'll come up sometime. So none of them really had binoculars.
Okay.
So they're just out there in the pitch darkness going, I don't really see anything, do you?
Wow, so they're humans' eyesight powered.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's, again, a series of really, like, whose fault is it? I would say it's the captain's because, listen, if I'm the captain of the boat and I'm walking around, I'm like, bitch, where's y'all's binoculars? Like, what are y'all doing? What are you doing this for? Get a binocular. You know? I don't know. It's weird. So by the time that the iceberg was spotted, the captain was alerted and it was too late. Again, a source said that the captain instructed the crew to speed up as they swerved. So they're trying to U-turn. They're trying to make a turn and kind of avoid the iceberg. And the captain's like, speed this shit up. Generally speaking, with smaller boats, increasing the speed makes it easier and faster to turn. But the same logic does not apply to a humongous boat like the Titanic. Why, you ask? I don't know. Physics. I really don't know. I try to read a whole thing on it and I'm like, I still don't know. There's no way I can explain it. It wasn't gonna work. They were too close. It wasn't speeding up. So they collided. They didn't collide head on with the iceberg, which honestly would have been better. They collided on the side. Now this collision was not an earthquake. They weren't going that fast. In fact, most passengers didn't even realize what happened. A lot of them slept through it. Some of them said it felt like a small, shaking, and they were kind of blissfully unaware, and that's why you get these stories of people still drinking, eating their dinner, when chaos was just right around the corner. But the crew working downstairs, slaving away with the coal, they saw the damage firsthand. Water was flooding in. The iceberg had scraped the sides of the ship, and the watertight doors were immediately closed, but it was very apparent that at least 5 of the compartments were flooded. They were breached.
5 out of what?
16, but remember the magic number was 4.
Oh.
4 compartments flood, it's going down.
What?
So
now it sounds like a really poor design. What are you saying? I thought they designed it so well that...
So the ship was sinking, and it was going to be sinking fast. The sad irony of all of this is that if the ship had hit the iceberg head on, there was a better chance of it not sinking. Because the side, I guess everyone thought that the Titanic, if it were to ever hit anything, it would be from a head-on collision. So they built the front bulkhead really sturdy and a lot higher than the other sides.
Wow.
Yeah. So... most likely, the captain thought that he could swerve the iceberg and turn in time, but that did not happen. And the Titanic sent out an SOS around midnight. The closest ship to them at the time was the Californian. In fact, you could see the Californian aboard the Titanic. But again, they had switched off their radios because after Phillips was rude to the operator, so they did not receive that distress call. They did not get the SOS. I mean, imagine living with that guilt, even though I'm not trying to say it's your fault, but imagine living with that guilt. I would put a lot of guilt on myself. Some reports said that the Californian was close enough to see some lights emitting off the Titanic, and they did send back a Morse code light signal, like, are you okay, pretty much? And the Titanic did not respond because they're dying. And instead of turning on their signal back on and being like, hello, Titanic, over, are you okay, over, they just were like, well, I'll figure it out in the morning. I'm sure it's just the crew having fun aboard the Titanic. The next closest ship was the Carpathia. I want to say Carpaccio, it's not. She was 58 miles away, which sounds close. She heard the distress signal, charged full speed to the Titanic, but it would still take her 4 hours to make it there. The Titanic would only have 2 hours before it fully capsized. Now, the captain realized his mistake, and some say it was definitely a little too late. Like, some say he was enjoying his time with the CEO, having a blast on his last retirement trip. He was drinking, he was eating, he was having fun. But regardless, when he finally came to realize the severity of the lifeboats and the severity that they're not capable of keeping all the passengers afloat, he also knew that the Carpathia was so far away that it was inevitable that people were gonna die. He had a mental breakdown right then and there. I don't blame him. I think regardless of what you think of him, imagine the weight of that. Like, just...
I think it's the fact that it's the 2 hours.
Yes!
That there's nothing you can do now.
It's not this instant, like, we're going down, I'm holding on, there's nothing I can do. It's the 2 hours of no decision I make can alter the course of this, but you're not gonna stop making decisions.
Yeah.
Like, you have to still try, right? And the 2 hours of seeing everyone panicked, the crew that trusted you, the passengers that put their life in your hands. I mean, it's so much blood on your hands, regardless of if you think that's true or not. So much blood. And in this distressed, not thinking clearly, he very meekly ordered the crew. Women and children first. But somehow, the crew heard this as women and children only. Which led to a ton of lifeboats being launched half empty.
What?
Yeah, that's why you're like, wait, that doesn't make sense because there was like 1,000 something people that didn't have a lifeboat.
Serious?
But more people ended up dying. Just empty seats.
What?
Yeah, but Bruce, the CEO, he helped load up the lifeboats with women and children. And on the very last lifeboat, he got on. And at that point, over 1,600 people were still on the Titanic. Not only were there no lifeboats left, but most passengers couldn't even get a life jacket because of the chaos. And here's the infuriating thing. Like, I guess it makes sense, but the crew was super focused on keeping everybody calm and kind of downplaying the situation because, you know, I guess that's what they're trying to do. So once it's life or death, it was complete chaos in every definition of the word. I mean, not that having a life jacket would have helped much. So there's varying accounts of the captain's last moments. Some say that he snuck off and, you know, some say he was on the bridge of the ship just waiting to go down with her. Some say he is alive and made it to the UK and was found in the US later. Remember that? Remember that conspiracy?
So that's a huge conspiracy that he's
because
alive.
Only like 300 bodies were found.
Oh.
So, I mean, he could have very well been like the other 1,200 bodies that weren't found. Now, here's another fascinating thing to note. A lot of the women and children couldn't testify in court to what actually happened because back then, women weren't allowed to testify in court. And guess who were the main survivors of the Titanic? Women and children.
What?
Yeah.
What kind of...
I know. So anyways, around 2 a.m., the Titanic capsized. And we're gonna get into a little bit more of like the survivor accounts later. But the people on the lifeboats, they had to watch helplessly while some passengers, they could see their husbands, their friends, their male coworkers, the male crew throwing themselves off the Titanic. Remember the scenes where they're all jumping off? So the theory is that suction is the thing that kills you. So if something that big is sinking into the water, it could create this suction effect. I believe that's a myth. I believe it's less of suction, but rather, I guess it's suction in the sense of like water's filling an empty space. So the water's here, the boat is kind of pushing it down. Now there's this empty space and the water is gonna just
Squash you, yeah.
Squash you, right? So I guess in a sense it is suction. That's why like when your car, if it flies over a bridge, you gotta have a window breaker or you gotta roll the windows down ASAP. Because that suction and that pressure, like there's no way you can get out. There's no way you can open a door. So rather than, now anyways, if there is anyone left on the ship, left in some miraculous air pocket of sorts, they would have died shortly after the sinking. Some say that any air pockets would have physically imploded from the pressure of the water. So maybe that's some good thing to know, that a lot of experts believe that there were no air pockets in the ship before it capsized, because I can't imagine a death like that. So a lot of these passengers, they were just plunged into the freezing cold waters of the Atlantic. It was so cold. I mean, being in water like that, it's not even about being able to float or swim anymore. The coldness causes disorientation, exhaustion, unconsciousness within like the first 15 minutes. You're only expected to survive for about 14 to 45 minutes. Your core temperature goes down and it's just a matter of minutes before hypothermia sets in, which I always find it fascinating. Like humans, you could say technically rule the earth because like, you get it, we're like destroying earth to rule it. But the fact that we have such a sensitive inner body core temperature and just a few degrees.
So weak.
Yeah, it's like the dumbest shit ever.
I was thinking about it the other day, like even like a day without showering and shaving and just imagine like how much effort we put into just to keeping yourself like presentable. I'm like, if we go into the nature, like without shampoo, without like anything, just a day or two, we all get
crazy. Pimples. We
get
little,
exactly, acne all coming. Like we're so weak.
We are not meant for this world.
We are so weak.
It's so bad. Like the fact that you have this body temperature, a few degrees, you're dead.
Exactly.
It's like, what?
Yeah, when you have a fever, it's like 1 to 2 degrees. Yes. You're like,
hospital or home, yeah.
High fever.
You're like,
okay, 2 degrees.
This is bad.
You're getting cooked.
Yes. Anyways, back to the seriousness. So some of the passengers were lucky enough to be pulled by neighboring lifeboats. And I think only about 5 people survived this way. And you're like, why? That doesn't make sense. There's about 500 free spots on the lifeboats. Well, when you get on a lifeboat, your first thing is to row as far away from the ship because you're scared of the suction thing, right? Like that's the thing that everybody thinks about. I don't know if it's truly a myth. It's just something that's been advised to everybody. And it also has to do with the propellers of these giant boats, these ships. And a second thing is, there's like 600 people, 500 spots. Have you guys heard of the crabs in a bucket? Humans and crabs are very similar. If you have crabs in a bucket, okay? If you have one crab in a bucket, it can actually climb its way out. Like you go crab fishing, you put one crab in a bucket. It will climb its way out by itself. So it has the physical ability of climbing its way out. But if you put 3 crabs in a bucket, if one gets close to the top, the other crabs will drag it down. The other crabs are dragging other crabs from freedom.
That's crazy.
So a lot of these lifeboats
could have helped each other, but instead they're dragging each other down.
Yeah, but these lifeboats, they can't go back because most likely they would have sunk.
Oh.
Because the survivors would have crowded the lifeboats and it would have sunk.
God.
So most of the people in the water, they were met with a very tragic end. They were dying either of cardiac arrest, hypothermia, or drowning. They did not go peacefully. They screamed for their lives. One survivor said, "The sound of people drowning is something I cannot describe to you. Neither can anybody else. It is the most dreadful sound. Then there is this dreadful silence that follows it." Another survivor refused to go to any football stadiums or just anywhere that you could hear collective voices screaming. Either in joy or cheering or anything, it didn't matter. It only reminded him of the screams of the people that were in the water that night. Another survivor said, "There arose to the sky the most horrible sounds ever heard by mortal man, except by those of us who survived this terrible tragedy. The agonizing cries of death from over 1,000 dreaded throats, the wails, the groans of the suffering, the shrieks of terror stricken, and the audible gasping for breath of those in the last throes of drowning, none of us will ever forget to our dying day." They would scream things like, "Ahoy boat, help, help, my God, help." There were heart-rending cries and shrieks of men which floated to us over the surface of the dark waters continuously for the next hour. But as time went on, the voices grew weaker and weaker until they died out completely. More than 1,500 people lost their lives, but only 300 bodies would be recovered. Mainly men. There were women and children among those who died in the ocean as well. So let's talk about a few of the survivors. Violet Jessup. She is often called the Queen of Sinking Ships or Miss Unsinkable because she survived all three of the disasters. So Violet was born in Argentina, and this is all important to the story. Her parents were Irish immigrants, and she was the first of 9 children. Now, her parents were not making money. They didn't even have a real stove in their kitchen, so she grew up as like the second mom. I think if you're like a sibling, or if you're the oldest and you have a ton of siblings, you know this. You're like raising your siblings. That's how my sister felt. So she's, cooking for her siblings. She's caring for them, making sure they went to school. And it was a lot. 3 of her siblings died from childhood illnesses, which was common back then, but still traumatizing. At one point, Violet was expected to die. She came down with this sickness and she was coughing up blood. They take her to the hospital, and the doctors in front of her are like, "Oh, we're so sad. Remarkable child you have. What a shame that she's gonna die. I'll miss her when she's gone." And walked out. Like the parents just expected she was gonna die, but she didn't. She survived. Which I'm laughing at the doctor saying that. Like, that is just, what is up with that morale? She ends up surviving the tuberculosis, but that is not the only hardship she would face. She would be assaulted by a neighbor. He would lead Violet into his bedroom under the guise of wanting to show her something. He tried to assault her, but his daughter came home. So he opened the door and was like, "Oh, don't mind us. We weren't doing anything suspicious. We were just chasing a rat out of the room." Why does Violet, our neighbor, look so scared? Our underage neighbor, why does she look so scared? She's scared of rats. That's why. So after that, her dad dies when she's really young, and they end up moving to the UK because, they're Irish, it's closer to their home country. They thought maybe the UK had, or England, sorry. They thought at least England had maybe more opportunities for a job. So Violet's at home raising her siblings, and her mom starts working as a stewardess on top of a ship, aboard a ship, to support the family, and she's working nonstop. And she ends up getting so sick that she can't work anymore. So Violet ends up having to pick up the slack. She starts, getting interviews with all these ship liners, and all of them say, "Well, you're too young. You're only 20. We usually only hire widows because, there's nothing at home stopping them from being away for so long. And on top of that, you're too pretty." Yeah, so, it's going to be really hard for you. Like, we're just going to be honest. Scary things happen on a ship. Like, other crew members, passengers, captains are going to try to rape you probably. So she's like, "Wow, it's really great being a woman. I love it here. Cool, but I need a job, so please, I will be careful. I will not show my face. I will keep my head down, and hopefully I don't get raped on the job." Does that sound good to you? They're like, "Okay, fine." So Violet's offered a job, and she would become the breadwinner of the family. Her first struggle, she said, were sea legs. She's like, "How can I dust, sweep, and carry trays filled with food if I feel wobbly and sick all the time?" Because you're like, "I've been on a cruise, it's not that bad." This is the 1900s. You think it's not that bad back then? Like, you're like this the whole time. It's bad. And she knew if she didn't get it together, she'd be fired. So she's like doing all of this. She's missing her family. She even had this nasty thumb infection. She'd have to get it like squeezed, and it was like the size of a sausage. And she said that was her first experience of the selfishness of passengers. She said, "After a week of agony and sleeplessness, I had my thumb lanced for the 3rd time, and I was returning to my cabin with as much composure as possible, because she's in pain, and I had to go through this little room where there was like a sing-song in progress, like one of those like karaoke rooms, and a woman stops me and said, 'Oh dear, have you had your thumb lanced again?' I said, 'Yes, ma'am, I have.' 'Well, since you're up, you might as well get me a glass of brandy. I feel a bit faint in here, it's so hot.' Violet couldn't say no. She couldn't complain. She had to maintain her composure no matter how many assholes she had to serve. It was bad, okay? If guys hit on her, if passengers hit on her, she had to reject them so nicely, with so much tenderness, because if she ever bruised their delicate little egos, one complaint is all it took for her job to be on the line. And the complaint isn't like, "Oh, she spit in my food." It's not even a lie. Like, these men would literally go in there and be like, "I tried to rape her and she said no." And they'd be like, "Fire that bitch." Anyway, so after a little bit of this, Violet applies to the White Star Line, and this was a huge deal. This was one of the biggest, most luxurious cruise companies. Well, not a cruise company, but you get it. They had high standards for the stewardesses. It was considered an honor for Violet to be able to work for them. It's giving me Korean Air right now, okay? So within months, Violet was promoted to first class service, and she liked it. She said that most of the passengers that she served were Americans, and she really liked it now. I know. We never really get much praise. So here we go. She said Americans were very friendly, understanding, and appreciative. She said that they acknowledged you as an individual, and in fact, they demanded to know your name at the first time of meeting you. It's so cute that she said demanded to know your name. That's so true. We're like, what's your name? It's very demanding, actually. So she said that Americans are, easy to recognize, that crew are there to make your life better. And tipping culture in America is great, she said. They're always tipping. So she loved first class with the Americans, okay? Now, anyways, Violet gets chosen to serve aboard the Olympic. This was a huge deal. Again, okay, this is like the top of the top. White Star Line people are serving on the Olympic. But it wasn't sunshine and rainbows, It was definitely rough. And she was aboard the Olympic when the Hawk incident happened. April of 1912. Or in 1912, the Hawk incident, where there was no casualties, but they got the 2 holes on the side. So then they went to the Titanic and were like, give me your stuff. So now that the Olympic was being patched up, the Titanic was about to set sail, and Violet was chosen to aboard the Titanic. Violet said she was really uneasy boarding the Titanic. A lot of survivors said this. Some could say it was a very creepy premonition for what was about to take place. Some said that it was just unnatural at the time to be boarding such a massive ship. Like, it wasn't common. So the night of the crash, Violet's in her quarters with a fellow stewardess getting some sleep in, and she hears like a low crunching noise. It wasn't even this big boom. It was just like a crunch. And the sound of the engine slowly shutting off. And then it was just dead quiet because the engines are off. And she's pretty close to the engines because she's a stewardess, right? Then there was silence for about a minute. She said that doors started opening in the hallway, and all of these fellow crew members were coming out of their rooms, and they were whispering, almost as if someone speaks, it was going to set something off. It was going to set something into motion. They were almost too scared to even say what was going on. Now, Violet and Anne, they freaked out. I mean, they didn't even need confirmation. They had a feeling and they knew what happened. They got dressed, they exited their rooms, and it was said that a superior told them in a hushed voice, yes, we are in fact sinking. We're going down. So Violet and Anne, they did the only thing that they could. They went door to door, calmed down the passengers and told them, please get your life jacket, put on some very warm clothes, take blankets and valuables, and come to the upper deck. Violet herself went to the upper deck. And this is the very fascinating thing about the Titanic, and why it took so long for people to go into full pandemonium, is that it didn't feel like it was sinking for like the first hour and a half. It just was such a slow sink. Even at the upper deck, Violet saw women and children being pushed into lifeboats, but Bruce and the captain were on deck and they were just casually talking, and when she passed by, they smiled at her. And she waved back awkwardly. Like, it was really weird. Like, you guys are so nonchalant and we're all boarding the lifeboats. Are we just doing this for safety precautions? Like, what's going on? Like, nobody could comprehend what was going on. It just felt like overdoing it. Some passengers were like, oh, this is so dramatic. Like, it's not that big of a deal. We're on the unsinkable boat. We're not even sinking. Like, we don't even see water rushing in yet or anything. Felt precautionary. She said it seemed like nobody was aware of how dire the situation was. And even the women and children that were being ushered onto the lifeboats, they didn't even seem panicked. Maybe because, truly, it didn't feel like it was sinking. It was such a large ship. I don't know. You could also see the Californian ships nearby, so I think everybody thought, oh, even if the lifeboats are empty, we're just trying to get women and children out there first. The Californian's gonna meet us halfway, pick up the women and children, they'll send the lifeboats back, we'll get the men. Wow. No need for panic. But slowly, the panic's gonna start setting in because Violet sees families being torn apart. I mean, once they got to the last couple of lifeboats, it was getting bad. Women and children were leaving husbands, fathers behind. There were tearful goodbyes. Violet saw a man hurl himself over the side of the deck to try to get on a lifeboat underneath to save himself. I think it worked. The Titanic was starting to tilt now, and this is when people started getting panicked. The front deck was closer to water than just like 5 minutes ago, like exponentially closer. Violet said that she felt herself being pushed onto a lifeboat, and before the lifeboat was dropped into the water, this man rushed up to her and very casually put something in her arms and said, hey, will you look after this? She looks down. She's holding a baby. Someone's forgotten baby.
No way.
Or maybe someone who knew that they wouldn't make it off the ship and wanted someone to desperately save their child. But she's got a baby. So she's like shocked in this lifeboat. The lifeboat drops into the water. They're like aggressively rowing away from the Titanic. And this baby is just crying in her arms. There were a few men on the lifeboat, the ones that were rowing away from the Titanic. And Violet started counting how many decks were still above the water. So it was 6. Then a moment later, 5. Then 4. Then 3. And there was no denying it anymore. The Titanic was fully going to sink. She looked over at the Californian and she couldn't help but wonder, like, why isn't it coming to help? This doesn't make any sense. So there's some arguments on what happened. Captain Lord, yeah, that's his name. Okay. He was the captain of the Californian, and he said that he didn't know the Titanic was sinking until it was too late. And by the time that it was actively sinking, there was a ton of ice between him and the Titanic. So it wasn't a straight shot. It would have taken him even longer than the other boat to get to the Titanic.
Really?
Yeah. So regardless, I don't really know if this is true. Maybe he just didn't want to help. Maybe there was too much worry and stress and anxiety. Maybe he felt like he was going to capsize. I don't know. The Titanic was going down, and a lot of lives were going to be lost. Violet said that as she watched the Titanic sink, it was this breeze. The first that she felt on the entire night, she felt a breeze. And it blew this icy blast across her face, and it felt like a knife was penetrating her. She sat paralyzed with cold and misery, and she watched the Titanic give this huge lurch forward. And one of the funnels toppled off like cardboard, falling into the sea with this fearful roar. A few cries came across the water, then silence. And as the ship started to right again, like a hurt animal with a broken back, she settled for a few more minutes, and there was only one more deck of lighted ports, and that too disappeared. And she went down by the head with a thundering roar of underwater explosions. She said, "Our proud ship, our beautiful Titanic, gone to our doom." One awful moment of empty, misty blackness enveloped us in its loneliness. Then an unforgettable, agonizing cry went up from 1,500 despairing throats. A long wait, and then silence. Our tiny craft tossing about at the mercy of the ice field. So she's saying they couldn't do anything but just witness the horror of what was being happening. They didn't even know if they were being rescued. So Violet looked around, and finally they were able to board Carpathia, the boat that came to save them. And she looked around, and many of her friends and her colleagues weren't even there. She knew that they were dead. So Violet's standing there in shock when a woman runs up to her and just snatches the baby out of her arms and never says a freaking word. Violet was so confused. Who is this woman? Years later, Violet gets a call, and it's so odd and so creepy. She picks it up. "Hello? Is this Violet Jessup?" "Yes, who is this?" "Is this the Violet Jessup who was a stewardess on the Titanic and rescued a baby?" "Yes, it is. Who is this, and what is it that you want?"
I was that baby.
And the caller hung up.
What?
And Violet was so confused because she never told anyone about the baby. Like, she told the police, and there was some record, but record keeping was really shoddy back then. It wasn't on the news. Like, there were so many survivors of the Titanic. It was decades later that she wrote her own memoir. Like, what? Who was that? Who would have even known? And how would the baby have even known it was Violet that saved her? It's just so weird. No? And why did they call like that? Why didn't they just say, "Oh, like, thanks for saving me"? It just adds to the layer of eeriness of this whole thing. But surprisingly, this would not be the last ship disaster for Violet, because she went to work on the Britannic, the third of the Olympic-class ocean liners. Now, this is the last surviving one, and during World War II, it was converted into a hospital ship. Now, she worked for the British Red Cross, and November 21st of 1916, she was getting breakfast for a sick coworker ready, and she heard this dull, deafening roar and a shudder. She was like, I don't know if she said that. But everyone jumped up, and this was the opposite of the Titanic. She said they were in the middle of a world war. There was nothing calm about this noise. Nobody was keeping calm about this situation. Are they under attack? What the hell is going on? So the Britannic, they thankfully didn't have a ton of sick patients, or any at all, on board that day. Violet was actually taking care of one of her sick colleagues. If there were sick people, the death toll would have been higher than the Titanic disaster. Because they're sick, they can't move. And there would have been so many of them. But they only had 28 casualties, which is a lot. So Violet, she calmly went to her room, packed her valuables, because like this is the third time this happened. She's over it now. And she went up board, and she was on one of the later lifeboats. Thankfully, they had enough lifeboats for not just the women and children, but the lifeboat that was lowered onto the water right before Violet's lifeboat was lowered, it was sucked into the ship's propellers. Let me explain. So when a lifeboat is lowered, you have to row as hard and as fast as possible in a very specific direction so you don't get sucked into the incredibly powerful propellers of a ship of this size. It's all about making distance between you and the massive ship right away. Anyway, the boat before them couldn't row out the propellers, and the lifeboat and all the people inside were sucked in, and blood, wood, body parts flung everywhere. There was brain matter just floating around. There were limbs, there were decapitated heads floating around in the water. So I don't know if the people rowing Violet's lifeboat were just as incapable of rowing the lifeboat because maybe they're just regular people, or if they were just so shocked at seeing the gruesome, bloody, grotesque scene, they got sucked into the propeller, but not as quickly as the first lifeboat. So everybody had time to jump out, and Violet was the last one to jump out of her boat. And she looked behind, and she saw the rest of her boat and everybody else on the lifeboat being sucked into the propellers. Somehow she jumped far enough that she wasn't sucked, but she did kind of get drowned for a little bit. She was horrified. She saw just severed heads floating near her, limbs everywhere, blood in the water. And like, you know what they say, sharks love blood. And she was freaking out. Thankfully, she found a life jacket to hold on to, and she saw the Britannic floating away, about to capsize. She heard someone scream, there's a woman! And another lifeboat of survivors pulled her out of the water. And when she looked down, her leg was just badly torn and gashed and like shredded. She was in shock. The survivors made their way to a nearby island that nobody spoke English in, but really nobody needed to communicate because you could tell what the survivors needed. The doctors on the tiny island, they gathered, they treated the wounds, but I mean, they really didn't have the facilities. They did the best that they could until they were rescued again. So despite having pretty severe untreated head injuries and untreated wounds, she survived. And for a really long time, nobody knew what happened on the Britannic. It was a mystery. There was a whole documentary called The Mystery of the Britannic. And it wasn't until maybe recently, I want to say like 2016 or 2006, that we found out. This was in like 1916, but it's speculated that it hit a deep sea mine. But then Violet went back to work on ships. Yeah, she had bills to pay. She would actually die of heart failure at the age of 83. So after the Titanic sunk on its maiden voyage, they still didn't give up on the Britannic. They still let it. It's weird. The whole thing is weird. Oh, but did you know that there were actually a lot of stories that we didn't really get to know about what happened on the Titanic until way later? Mainly because, like I said, you couldn't speak in court if you were a woman. So there was this woman named Maggie Brown, and Maggie Brown is actually very fascinating. She is an American woman. She actually helped set up the first U.S. juvenile courts as a woman during that time period. Do you know how hard that is? So she went to Paris to visit her daughter, but then her granddaughter got sick. So she booked the fastest ticket back home to America, which was aboard the Titanic. And when disaster struck, Maggie helped as long as she could. She actually had to be pushed onto a lifeboat because she refused to get on one. Like someone literally threw her onto a lifeboat. Even when they were on the lifeboat, it said that everyone said Maggie was one of those people that were trying to get the lifeboat to go back. Wow. And help the survivors. And everybody voted against her on the lifeboat and was like, yeah, no, we're not gonna die. Like, thank you, but no. So then after being rescued, she organized a survivors committee because, you know, there were a lot of first-class citizens that could get therapy, that could just live in their posh mansions. And obviously, I'm not downplaying their PTSD because they're going to have grief, they're going to have PTSD. But think about the third-class and second-class passengers who really aren't going to get any of that. So she created this charity and committee to help providing them informal counseling, to help secure basic needs for them so they can recover from that. She even used this platform and fame to promote issues about women's rights and workers' rights. She promoted education and literacy for children, and this is where it's interesting. She was actually one of the first women in the U.S. to run for office, and she ran in the U.S. Senate for 8 years before a woman even had the right to vote.
Wow.
She was introduced into the Colorado's Women's Hall of Fame, and there's even like a musical and a movie written about her. And during the last years of her life, Maggie became an actress. I mean, she did it all. And this is what she had to say. I only live once. I'm gonna do it all. That's the story of the Titanic.
What happened to the CEO?
Oh, he's alive. He made it back.
What happened?
Nothing really. I mean, there was a show with the White Star Line, so he didn't do great afterwards, but he still died rich. So I think they tried to do something to him legally, but it didn't work. And he was just branded a coward publicly, and everybody hated him. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. I'm sorry the cheese hardened because it got really wild. I don't even know what to say. That was a wild one. Let me know, what are your thoughts on this? And do you guys believe in the other Titanic conspiracies of the captain being alive? I feel like people would have reported that, no?
Yeah.
Imagine the boat just sunk and I look to my left on the lifeboat and I'm like, bitch, you stupid I'm gonna freaking write about this, okay? I'm gonna tell someone, it'd be crazy. So let me know, what are your thoughts on this? Make sure to check out HelloFresh, linked in the description, or use code BIS16 to get up to 16 free meals and 3 surprise gifts. And I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye.